User-defined functions, part 3. Here's a function that we're going to look at enhancing with a user-defined function. What you should be doing is copying and pasting as is into Visual Studio. If you looked at where my notes are for these recordings, there's a user-defined function master. That's the original PowerPoint. If you go into the master, the original PowerPoint allows you to click inside this box and then copy and paste the code. Okay, let's act like the compiler so that we know what our code does. Then we'll add in a user-defined function to read. We'll add in a user-defined function to print. We'll add in a user-defined function to calculate. Let's act like the compiler. Okay, so define CTR secure no warnings. We're turning off the warnings that we get from scanf. We're going to include the standard input-output library. We're going to start our program. We declare a few variables, array, ij, mn. We declare variables a and sum and set them equal to 0. Okay, now here we are going to ask the user for the size of the matrix to be put in, and those are going to be read into m and n. So as an example, let's put in, say, m is equal to 3 and n is equal to 3. So that's what m and n hold after I read those off of the keyboard. Okay, so now we go in and we have that double loop. We have an ij loop. I controls the rows, j's control the columns, just as before. And what this tells us here is that we're reading in the matrix for this part of our code. So we're just going to read in the matrix. Okay, so let's say we put in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and a 0, for example, for reading in our matrix. Okay, here, your matrix is here, so we're going to print our matrix. Here it's going to sum. We're going to sum the main diagonal, and we're going to sum the off diagonal. The main diagonal, if you remember from math class, is this one. 6 plus 4 is 10 plus 1, 8. 6 plus 4 is 10 plus 8. We should get 18 for the sum of the diagonal. And then this one is our off diagonal. So if we take 2 plus 6, that's going to give us 8. So let's go over to Visual Studio and see how this looks. But we've acted like the compiler, and so we know what our program should be doing. Okay, so we're going to say debug, start without debugging. Okay, so our size, we want to put in a 3 by 3. And our entries were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and a 0. Okay, now according to acting like the compiler, we've read in the matrix. Now we're going to print it, and then it's going to sum the diagonals. Okay, so there's our reading in our matrix. It's going to print it, sum the diagonals. And there it is. And just like we had thought 8 was the sum of the main diagonal, 18 was the sum of what's called the off diagonal. And that's, again, if we remember what we learned with matrices in math class. Okay, so let's add in a user-defined function to read the matrix, and then we're going to test that code. Okay, so what do we have with user-defined functions? We have a read, we have a call, we have a declare, we have a call, and then we have a define. declare lets the compiler know that we're building our own function. We're going to call the function that we built. How do we tell the compiler what our built function does? That's our definition. In between, at main void, we're going to declare our user-defined function. It needs a return type, a name, and parameters that are going to accept arguments that are sent from int main void. So let's see, if we're reading, I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to return nothing. I'm going to say read matrix as its name. And here we're going to declare variables. So I want them declared just the way I would declare like array and m and n. Okay, so we're going to say int a, 10 by 10. Then we're going to say row a, int, column a. Okay, we're just saying compiler. We're going to write our own function. We're going to call it read matrix. We're going to send in a generic matrix A, a generic row A, a generic column A, and so with our function, it's going to accept these three arguments. It's going to accept these three arguments from int main void. Okay, we're going to copy. We're going to go past the return 0. And past the return 0, notice we're outside of the int main void. This is where we're going to define our user-defined functions. It has to be exactly matched as our declaration. It has to have exactly letter for letter, space for space, but instead of the semicolon ending the statement, what we're going to do is we're going to define what it does when I call it. Okay, so what do we want it to do? We want it to read our matrix. Here's our code for reading the matrix. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste. Okay, we see lots of red squigglies. That should be expected. For example, why would we have a red squiggly under I and J? Within this independent mini program, I and J are not defined, so we have to define them. Okay, red squiggly with M and N. Well, M and N were variables that we needed back in int main void. We can't use them in our independent mini program. We have to use variables that we declared within our mini program, and that was row A, call A. So we don't have M, it's not defined inside of our user-defined function. Row A and call A are. So we're going to replace those with row A, call A. Okay, here's another red squiggly. We don't have array defined within our independent mini program. Array was up here in int main void, so we can't use it down here in read matrix. What matrix have we declared within our mini program, within our UDF? That was A. So instead of array, we're going to put A. Okay, so let's call. We're going to call our matrix. What name did we give it? That's right here, read matrix. So we're going to call read matrix. Once I open the parentheses, Visual Studio is very nice to us. It says, okay, void, I'm not going to return anything. You called me, read matrix, and you said you're going to send in these three things. These are called parameters. In int main void, they're called arguments. What matches up with parameter A? That would be array. What matches up with row A? That's M. What matches up with call A? That's N. Okay, we're going to do start without debugging. 3 by 3. Our matrice was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And you shouldn't have seen any difference because we didn't change the program. All we did was make it more efficient by creating a user-defined function read matrix, calling it, and then defining what it does.